So today, we're going to dive into a crisis that really shook the foundations of the pharmaceutical world. It's a story about how one hidden danger, lurking in some of our most common medicines, ended up exposing three critical failures in the very system that's supposed to protect us.
I mean, think about it. Every day, millions of us take pills for everything, from heartburn to high blood pressure. We just trust that they're safe. But back in 2018, it became terrifyingly clear that some of these everyday drugs were hiding a dangerous secret, a contaminant that absolutely never should have been there.
And that contaminant? It has a name, nitrosamines. So what exactly are these things? Well, to put it simply, they're a class of chemicals that are classified as probable human carcinogens. That means if you're exposed to them over a long period, your risk of cancer could go up. And suddenly, these were popping up in our medicine cabinets.
And look, this wasn't some small, isolated problem. Not at all. In 2018, finding these nitrosamines kicked off this massive chain reaction of recalls all around the world, from Europe all the way to North America. All of a sudden, drugs people had been relying on for years were getting yanked off the pharmacy shelves.
Okay, so how much is too much? Well, regulators have a very specific number. For NDMA, which is one of the most common nitrosamines they've found, the daily limit is just 96 nanograms. To put that in perspective, that is an unbelievably tiny amount. But a lot of these recalled drugs had levels that were way over that safety line, which is why regulators had to move so fast.
So the big question is, how did this even happen? To figure it out, we're going to break this down like a detective story into three separate case files. In our first case, well, it uncovers a problem not with how the drug was made, but with the drug molecule itself. It's a problem of stability.
Our first major clue comes from a drug you've almost certainly heard of, ranitidine. You probably know it by its famous brand name, Zantac. For decades, it was one of the most trusted, go-to remedies for millions of people.
Now here's what's so wild about this case. The problem wasn't some contamination at a factory. Nope, the ranitidine molecule itself was basically a ticking time bomb. It was just inherently unstable, and over time it could literally break down and form that carcinogen, NDMA. And this whole process would speed up in warm conditions, meaning a pill could get more dangerous just sitting in your bathroom cabinet. The original safety approvals had completely missed this.
So the key lesson from this first case is pretty stark. A drug's safety isn't something you can just check once and then forget about. What's perfectly safe the day it's made might not be safe a year or two down the line. This exposed a massive blind spot and proved that stability testing had to get a whole lot tougher.
Okay, on to our second case, and this time, the failure wasn't baked into the drug's design. Instead, it was hidden deep within the incredibly complex global process of actually making it. This was a textbook manufacturing flaw.
The next set of alarm bells started ringing for a whole class of very common blood pressure drugs called ARBs. That stands for angiotensin II receptor blockers. You might recognize names like valsartan or losartan. These are absolutely critical medicines for millions of people. And this revealed a completely different kind of problem. Here, the drug molecules were fine. They were stable. The issue was in the recipe. Some manufacturers, often in overseas facilities, had made what seemed like small tweaks to their process, maybe using a different solvent or changing a temperature. Well, those little changes accidentally created nitrosamines as a byproduct. The existing rules, called good manufacturing practice, just weren't robust enough to catch these kinds of hidden mistakes.
And man, this was a massive wake-up call for the entire industry. It really hammered home the point that when your supply chain stretches all across the globe, you just can't take anything for granted. You have to audit every single step, because one tiny, unapproved change in a factory halfway around the world can have huge, dangerous consequences for people everywhere.
All right, time for our third and final case. We've seen a failure in the drug molecule itself and a failure in how it was made. This next one shows that the risk can actually come from somewhere else entirely, from the outside in.
And the final piece of our puzzle is metformin. I mean, this is a cornerstone drug, a frontline medication used by tens of millions of people to manage type 2 diabetes. And with this drug, investigators discovered yet another way for these contaminants to get in. Now, the source of nitrosamines in metformin was a little more complex, but investigators eventually zeroed in on a pretty alarming new possibility. The contamination could be coming from the packaging itself. Yeah, the very materials used to store and ship the pills could be interacting with the drug. This was a total blind spot in the old risk assessments.
And that right there brings us to our third crucial lesson.
Drug safety isn't an event, it's a journey. It's a chain that starts with the very first chemical reaction and extends all the way to that bottle sitting on a pharmacy shelf. The risk doesn't just stop once the pill is made. You have to consider the entire life cycle of the product.
So you've got 3 different drugs, 3 totally different failures. But when you look at them together, they tell a single, powerful story about the system that was supposed to keep us safe. It was time to forge a much stronger shield.
So let's just connect all these dots, right? With ranitidine, the drug itself was unstable. With the ARBs, the manufacturing process was flawed. And with metformin, even the packaging was a potential source of risk. Each case pointed to a different gap in the regulatory oversight. But when you put them all together, they showed the entire safety net had some serious holes.
And that brings us to the central verdict of this whole crisis. The problem wasn't really about pharmacology. It wasn't that the science behind the drugs was wrong. No, this was, at its heart, a regulatory systems failure. It was a failure of the rules, the oversight, and the processes that are supposed to guarantee our medicine is safe.
But you know what? The story doesn't end in failure. This crisis, as alarming and as scary as it was, became the massive, unavoidable wake-up call for regulators all over the world. Health Canada, the FDA in the US, the European Medicines Agency, you name it. It forced them to look these weaknesses right in the eye and do something about it.
And they did. In response, they basically wrote a whole new safety playbook. To fix the ARB problem, they seriously strengthened oversight of global manufacturing. To stop another metformin situation, they demanded better risk models for things like packaging. To catch the ranitidine flaw, they enhanced stability and stress testing. And crucially, they committed to being way more transparent with the public. These weren't just suggestions, they became the new rules of the game.
There's no doubt this crisis forced a crucial and much-needed evolution in drug safety. But it does leave us with one big lingering question. In our modern world of incredibly complex global supply chains, how do we build a safety net that isn't just reacting to the last crisis, but is smart and strong enough to stay one step ahead of the next hidden risk?